Hello students, this is Baskaran and I am very glad to meet you again. And in this session, we are going to see the first prose, the portrait of a lady written by Khushwant Singh. Now, before we go into the lesson, let's see about the author Khushwant Singh. Khushwant Singh is an Indian novelist and lawyer. He studied at St. Stephen's College, Delhi and King's College, London. He joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1947. As a writer, he is best known for his keen secularism, sarcasm, and love for poetry. He served as the editor of several literary and news magazines as well as 2 newspapers. Khushwant Singh was awarded with Padma Bhushan in 1974, Padma Vibhushan by the Government of India, and Sahitya Academy Fellowship by Sahitya Academy of India, The Mark of Vishnu, A History of Sikhs, The Train to Pakistan, Success Mantra, We Indians, and Death at My Doorstep are some of his brilliant works. Now, let's begin the prose. And we know the title is The Portrait of a Lady. The word portrait has 2 different meanings in English. One is a painting, drawing, or photograph of a person, especially of the head and shoulders, and the other meaning is a detailed description of somebody or something. That is depiction. That is explaining somebody or their appearance and character by words. And this is a story that brings out the bond between the author and his loving grandmother. To bring out means to show. You know, bring out is a phrasal verb. A phrasal verb is a combination of a verb and a preposition or an adverb. And the preposition or the adverb that follows the verb in the combination of a phrasal verb is called particle. They together give a meaning, give a sense. And the word loving means kind, affectionate, and caring. And so, this story shows the bond, that is, the love and attachment between the author and his affectionate grandmother. And the story begins like this. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for the 20 years that I had known her. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. The author says his grandmother was old, like everybody's grandmother, and she had a wrinkled face. Wrinkled means with wrinkles. Its antonym is smooth and even. He had known his grandmother for 20 years, and for all the 20 years she had been like that, but people had told him that she was young and pretty. Antonym of young is old, and you know, pretty means beautiful, and its antonym is ugly. And people had also said that she had a husband, but these things were very hard to believe for him. Hard to believe means he could not believe. It was tough for him to believe. It was not easy for him to believe. Because he had seen her only as an old and ugly woman. Now I continue reading the passage, you just follow. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. He wore a big turban and loose-fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person who would have a wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. The author says that in the drawing room of the house there was a mantelpiece, and over the mantelpiece his grandfather's portrait was hanging. You know, portrait means a painting or picture, and mantelpiece means a shelf above the fireplace. And now we must know what a fireplace is. Fireplace is an open space for a fire in the wall of a room. In cold countries, people have fireplaces in the rooms to keep the room and the people inside warm. And drawing room means a room in a large house in which people relax and guests are entertained. This is also called sitting room or living room or even a lounge. In the portrait, his grandfather wore a big turban. Turban is a headgear. It means a long piece of cloth bound tightly around the head. For example, Muslims and Sikhs wear turbans. Besides, his grandfather was wearing loose-fitting clothes. His clothes were loose. His beard was long and white that covered the best part of his chest. It means most of his chest. And he looked very old, almost 100 years old. He did not look the sort of person, that is, the kind of person who would have a wife or children, that is, a married man. He looked a celibate or a saint. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. It means he was looking very old. Now, I continue reading the passage. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child that seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. He says, it was very disgusting or extremely unpleasant to think that she was young and pretty. Revolting means disgusting or unpleasant, and the games she used as a child were absurd and undignified. Absurd means illogical and inconsistent. And so he says he treated all that she said as fables of the prophets. Fables means tales or stories. He means he was not able to believe that his grandmother was young and beautiful in her young age, and all that she said about the games she played were unbelievable. He could not believe them. And at the end of this passage, we come across a phrase, the fables of the prophets. The last word of this phrase is not to be pronounced prophet, it is to be pronounced prophet. Prophet means a person sent by God to teach the people and give them messages from God. That is, a messenger sent by God. And this phrase, the fables of the prophets, mean a collection of stories adopted from the Quran and the Islamic literature. And usually such stories are unbelievable. And so the author says that all that his grandmother said were treated by him like the fables of the prophets. That is, like the unbelievable stories or cock and bull stories. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her. Old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. He says his grandmother had always been short, fat, and bent on her back. He says crisscross of wrinkles. Crisscross means many straight lines that cross each other. So he says, her face had a lot of wrinkles and she had been so old that she could not have grown older, and she stayed very old for the past 20 years. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. She hobbled about the house in spotless white, with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and the other telling the beads of her rosary. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. He says, she could not have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. What does he mean by this? Pretty means the beauty in the external appearance, whereas beautiful here means the inner beauty, the beautiful qualities of that old lady. She hobbled, that is, walked unsteadily about the house, and always in spotless white saree, with one hand on her waist to balance the stoop she had on her back. She was bent, and so she wanted to balance her bend on her back. She was using the other hand to roll the beads of her rosary. Her silver hair was scattered over her pale, puckered face. Puckered means wrinkled, and her lips were moving in inaudible prayer, that is, in a prayer that was not audible. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. She was beautiful in her qualities. She was white like winter landscape. It means she was pure in her qualities. She was pure and peaceful. Contentment means satisfaction. Expanse means widespread, vast area. My grandmother and I were good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. See, the narrator and the grandmother were together because narrator's parents left him with her when they went to live in the city. And so he was with his grandmother in the village. They were together, and every day morning she used to wake him up and make him ready for school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing-song while she bathed and dressed me in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. I listened because I loved her voice but never bothered to learn it. When she bathes him and dresses him up, she used to sing her usual prayer in a monotonous, that is, unchanging, boring, uninteresting sing-song. Sing-song means something said in a singing fashion. She did it because she believed he would listen to it and he would by heart it. By heart means memorize it. But he listened to it because he loved her voice, but he never bothered to learn it, that is, he was not willing to learn it at all. Then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen, tie them all in a bundle and hand it to me. After a breakfast of a thick, stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. She would take everything mentioned here, like the wooden slate, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen, etc., and tie them together as a bundle and give it to him. And he would be fed breakfast, that is nothing but stale chapatis. Stale means not fresh. Those chapatis with a little of butter and sugar spread over them. And they will go to school together. She used to carry many stale chapatis with her to feed the village dogs on the way. My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. The priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer, while the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda singing the alphabet or the prayer in chorus. My grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. He says she used to go with him to school because the school was attached to a temple. The priest there taught them the alphabet and the morning prayer, while the children sat in rows on both sides of the veranda singing the alphabet or the prayer in chorus, and his grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. Scriptures means holy books of a particular religion. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. This time, the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapati we threw to them. When both of them finished their work, he says they would return home and the village dogs would meet them at the temple door. They used to follow them to their home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis they threw to the dogs. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. That was a turning point in our friendship. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. See, his parents were comfortably settled in the city, so they called both of them to the city house. So they went to the city house and they stayed with his parents. It was a turning point in the friendship between the grandmother and the grandson. Though they were in the same room, the attachment was not so good as that was in the village. She did not go with him to the school daily as she did in the village. He was going to an English school in a motor bus, and he found no dogs in the streets of the city, and she started feeding sparrows in the courtyard of the city house. A courtyard is a small open space within a building. As the years rolled by, we saw less of each other. For some time, she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. I would tell her English words and little things of the Western science and learning, the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, the world being round, etc. Some days, she would wake him up and make him ready for school. And when he returned from school, she would ask him what he was taught in the school. He would tell her the English words he learnt and some other little things of Western science and learning, like the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, and the world being round, etc. This made her unhappy. She could not help me with my lessons. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school and was distressed that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures. One day, I announced that we were being given music lessons. She said nothing, but her silence meant disapproval. She rarely talked to me after that. All that he said about his school and what he learned there made her unhappy. She was not able to help him in his lessons because she did not know anything about what he was taught. She did not believe in what he was taught in his school, and she was distressed, unhappy that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures. One day he told her that he was also given music lessons. She said nothing, she was quiet, and her silence meant her disapproval. And after that, she very rarely talked to him. Antonym of disapproval is approval. Dear students, with this I conclude this session, and let us meet again in the next session to discuss the remaining and concluding part of the story. Until then, goodbye from Baskaran. Thank you.